If you don't know what a pattern is, you're going to find out real soon, so don't worry, we'll teach you. So, well, maybe we should describe what a pattern is first. So, because I thought it would describe it for us, but it didn't. So patterns are basically blueprints to clothes. It's not just cosplay, it's like anything you're going to make with fabric. Clothes, doll clothes. Yes, I made this with this pattern, exactly. It was like just one of the few times I've just completely followed the pattern. Not for a cosplay, just for fun. So like, patterns are your window to the fabric soul. Wow, that was profound. And it's just like a blueprint, so it's pretty simple to understand. It's a pretty simple concept, I think. So before you begin with just starting on your pattern and making your cosplay, you're gonna want your measurements. The main ones you're gonna want are your bust, your waist, and your hips. Which there's a handy dandy little sheet, like the sheet here. If you just look it up on Google, you'll find like where you're supposed to measure. But basically, the bust is like the widest part of your upper torso. Boys, you have a bust too. You can't get out of that. You can't get out of measuring that. You also have a bust. It's just the technical term for it. The waist is the narrowest part between the two. It's the narrowest part on your body. Usually around your belly button, but not always. And then your hips, which is the widest part of your legs. So I'm very square. It's basically all the same measurement for me, but everyone has their own shape, so it's really important that you take them because pattern sizes and normal clothing sizes do not correspond. Don't trust that. Like, don't rely on your clothing size for your pattern size. It won't work for you in the long run. And yeah, so for taking measurements, you're definitely gonna, if you're like not used to doing it, you'll definitely want someone to help you because you might not take the most accurate measurements by yourself. So you can get one of us to help you if you ever want to. We can, if you ever need your measurements taken, we can bring a tape measure into club and help you out with that. Or just like buy a tape measure and pick out your roommate. Even if you don't know them, pick out a random person on the street. Just be like, hey, can you measure me?
Maybe don't do that.
And yeah, and when you do take your measurements, you're gonna want to, if for specific cosplays, you're gonna want to be wearing what you're gonna be wearing when you wear that cosplay. So like, this is mostly for ladies. If you're gonna be wearing a certain bra with your cosplay, then you probably want the measurements with that so you don't make it too small. Don't be me. I just measure with whatever I'm wearing on that day. So some people might think like using patterns make you less of a cosplayer, but like that's what they're here for. They're here to help you. So if you find a pattern that works for you, then go ahead and use it. Don't think that you have to draft out your entire own pattern and do all the math and like draw it out from scratch. Like that is not valid. I mean, it's valid if that's what you do, but also like telling people that they have to do that is, no. Just use, if it's what works for you, then use it. So let's start with basic pattern knowledge, which is why I handed out patterns to you guys, so you can look and see what's good. I would keep the things inside the envelope for right now, and just look at the outside of the envelope, because there's a lot of information on the outside. So all of you guys will notice that your patterns are a brand. So the biggest brands that we have are Simplicity, McCall's, Vogue, Butterick, Berta, and Quixel. And pretty much all the patterns I handed out, except for the one in the back, which is a weird vintage one I got from Goodwill, are going to be one of those brands, because that's what you find at the store nowadays. But I do have a lot of vintage ones that, like, you go to Goodwill, you find them for 90 cents, you're not going to say no. But they're a little more difficult to use, so they a lot of the time don't come with instructions. But you can get them for real cheap, and you can get a lot of them. So the ones like Simplicity, McCall's, and Quixel, and Butterick are going to be really beginner friendly. That's why I have a lot of them. They're really simple, more or less. They will walk you through the steps pretty easily. They don't do anything really out there unless you're doing like a period costume, in which, why? But then Vogue and Berta are more advanced and usually more expensive, especially Vogue. It's just, I haven't touched a Vogue pattern because I've heard they're very difficult, and honestly, most of the time you can find what you're looking for in a different brand. There are also like indie brands like Hey Cut Sew, so we have one up there which is the Sylvian inspired outfit. And Hey Cut Sew, they're really cool. They make a lot of like specific cosplayer patterns. So like they've done Taco from the Adventure Zone, they have like Magical Girl patterns, they have school uniforms, and like a lot of these patterns you can find in like the store in like a Simplicity catalog, but for Hey Cut Sew they make it for cosplayers, so it's really geared towards us, and so that's pretty cool. And yeah, and a lot of companies nowadays have been understanding that cosplayers are a big market for them. So McCall's and Simplicity definitely have gotten very large costume sections. Like a lot of the ones I handed out are costumes from Simplicity or McCall's that like I just bought because they're cool, and you never know when you're gonna need to make something like that. So like they'll straight up just have like the full Frozen costume if you want to make it yourself. They have things, a lot of things for guys and girls. Like McCall's has Doctor Strange. They don't call him any of those names. It's like Magic Man with cape, but you know what it is. You know what it is. Like they'll have Link, they have Zelda, they have Star Wars characters, anything you could think of when they have Assassin's Creed. So
I even found an armor pattern, like last time I was in Joanne, so.
yeah, they have bodysuits now too. The bodysuit should be floating out there somewhere. So, okay. So for finding patterns, you're gonna wanna find similar shapes. You might not always find exactly what you're looking for, but if you find like the basic shape of what you're looking for, you can modify it from there. Yeah, I can say most of the time you're not gonna find what you want exactly. You're gonna have to make some alterations, but as long as you have like the basic idea, at least you'll know it will fit you. So if you're looking online, which I suggest you do if you are like trying to like figure out, if you're trying to pre-pen your cosplay, I suggest you look online. You can go on McCall's website and like Simplicity's website directly, or you can just go on like Joanne's website and they'll have all the patterns, and you can just make sure you know what words you're looking for. So like if you're looking for like an A-line skirt or a maxi dress, things like that. And if you don't know what you're looking for, just like if you know you're looking for a skirt, but you don't know what it's called, just look up like skirt styles on Google. You'll get a whole infographic and you'll be able to find out what words you're supposed to be using. Same with like collars, different types of jackets, things like that. They all have their own word, which can be a little confusing sometimes, but once you figure it out, you figure it out. And then last, this should be like, this is also cut off, but this should be in bold and 6 different colors, because you're never gonna want to pay full price for a pattern. Like I'm telling you that right now. You're never gonna want to pay the $20, because if you guys look on all the patterns, there's a price somewhere. It's for like it can be like up here, or all these are about $20, and you're never gonna want to pay $20 for a pattern. So if you go on Joanne, they have coupon books, like sales for the week, and they'll tell you, or like every 2 weeks, they'll tell you what patterns are going to be on sale and when, and you want to go to those days, because please never buy a pattern for $20, guys. And actually, they're always 40% off, which will get you for like, what, like $16? Don't do that. Just, no.
Wait till they're
Please wait till they're $1. Like, it's worth to wait for it. And then when it is $1, just buy as many as you want. Like, just stock up on them, because you never know what you're going to need or when you're going to need it. And like, unless it's an absolute moment of desperation, you shouldn't have to pay $20 for a pattern. Okay, so before you buy, let's look at the bottom of all of our envelopes. Or the back of all of our envelopes. Yeah, I don't know, it's like really off, like it's really cut off. So, okay, I can go through this though. So, the back of the pattern envelope is going to tell you everything you want to know about what you're making. So,
This is fine.
this is fine. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So every pattern has a name and a number. So, like this pattern is 1094. So when you're in the store and you're looking in the catalogs, you're gonna get a number, and that's going to correspond to what drawer it's in and like where it is in the drawer. The drawers are usually labeled right. Sometimes.
At Joanne's, they are.
50% of the time, they're labeled right. But that's how you're going to find each pattern you want. Each pattern also will have a size, which, I'm trying to, so the sizes for the McCall's ones are on the side here. So this is 6 through 14. Each pattern is going to have the list of sizes, so some of them might be like small to extra large, some might be numbers, and those are the sizes you're going to look for on the back, where there are the measurements, and it's going to say bust, waist, hip, and then you'll know your measurements. You'll be able to figure out what size you are and what size you need, so you make sure you get the right size. It's a lot, I know, but everything you need is here. Also, the back's going to have materials suggested. So for this one, the suggested materials are cotton blends, poplin, sateen, and dotted Swiss. These are, they're just suggested, like you don't have to follow what they say. It's more of like, this is what we made it out of. Maybe you probably should stick within the realm. So like, if this says cotton, I shouldn't go buy latex for it. But like, also, if that's what you need, that's what you, if you're going for a latex look, you're going for a latex look. But these are, I mean, if it tells you to get stretchy fabric, please, for the love of God, get stretchy fabric. But like, if it doesn't, you don't have to follow it 100%. It's really what you want to make it out of. The notions are also on there. Notions include things like zippers, hooks and eyes, and buttons. Again, you'll know if you need what it says. Like if it says a zipper, you probably should get a zipper, because unless you have a different way of getting it on that you've already planned out, you should probably just buy a zipper. Hooks and eyes are usually negligible. You don't really have to use them. I mean, if you want to, it helps hold everything together in the back. It will help you zip it up better, but they're not super necessary. But things like boning, that'll tell you if you're making like a dress or like a corset, it will tell you how much boning you need or how much elastic you need if you're making something. So if you're going to be, if they're easy to miss, but don't miss them. Like make sure you look and see if you need what they say. You'll know if you need it. Like you'll know if you need the buttons they're telling you to get, or if you're just decided to do it a different way. But and then it also will tell you how much fabric you'll need. So each pattern comes with, I already told about measurements. Sorry. So each pattern, or most patterns have several different like things you can make in them. So this one, though it's technically all like basically the same, there are 4 different dresses in this one. And each one is shown on the back here with a different amount of fabric that you'll need. So you want to always make sure you know which one you're going to be making, and then you're looking at the right one when you go to buy your fabric. And they'll tell you how much you need depending on how big it is, if it's 45 inches or 60 inches. Some of them will just say you have to have 60 inches because otherwise the fabric won't be big enough. That's usually for like really long skirts though, or like a cape. Otherwise you don't really have to worry about that as much. It'll also tell you if you need any, what's the word, like other fabric, like contrast fabric. If you need any contrast fabric, so like this one up here, it has lace in the front, so it would tell you how much lace you need to put in that little panel. So yeah, it'll also tell you if you need interfacing, which we can all explain to you what all this means eventually, but right now, this is patterns, not interfacing 101. And then it will also tell you what it's gonna, how long it's gonna be when it's done and everything like that. So, yeah. And also tell you if you need any lining. Oh my gosh, Jessica. Okay.
No, sorry.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. So for pattern sizing, as I already said, regular clothing size is not your pattern size. Don't try and make that work. It will not work out for you. Maybe if you're using children's sizing, I think it might work, but like I don't think any of us but me maybe might be using children's sizing. So yeah, what matters the most is how it's gonna fit when it's done. So you're really gonna wanna follow the measurements they give you. So like even if like I wear a really small size, like I'm still gonna have to make a bigger size just because that's what it says I have to do. Don't let it reflect on yourself. So also you're gonna wanna pay attention to what thing you're making. So if I'm making a skirt, my bust size isn't really gonna matter because my skirt's not gonna be up here. I mean, maybe, but if you are making like a dress or a bodysuit or something like that, you're gonna wanna pay attention to all of them, and to be honest, you're gonna wanna pick whatever the biggest size is that you went for. So my problem that I come into a lot is that I'm a very small size, like hips and waist wise, but then, wait, no, opposite. I'm a very small size bust wise, I'll say it, and then hips and waist wise, I'm like average, like a medium or so. But then like bust wise, I'm an extra small. So I will always pick the medium and I will tailor it or I will make it smaller from there because you don't want it to be too small. You can make things smaller, but you cannot, well you can, but you don't want to make things bigger. It's just a hassle.
Mistake before. It's not fun.
This
It's
is
kind
like
of like-
a rule of thumb for everyone. If you're not sure, make it bigger.
Don't just assume, like, don't do your pattern size just based on one measurement. Like, I've definitely done that before where I was like, oh, my bust says I'm this size, and I didn't think about, oh, my hips could say I'm a size bigger. And I made a mistake, and it sucked because I made a skirt, and it was a lot of fabric that's very expensive. So, yeah, always check.
Like for this dress, I definitely like when I made it, the bottom fit me perfectly, but I definitely know that I had to take this in like the top like 3 or 4 inches after I made it because that's just how the sizings work. They don't know what human sizes are and everyone is shaped differently, so it's just what you're gonna have to go with. And you know, if you want to get a little crafty with it, if you're like, I'm taking the dress example because it has a top and a bottom. So if I was making this dress, again, maybe I would use the larger size for the bottom, but then just cut the smaller size out for the top right away and go with that. You know, you don't have to like use one size the entire time. As long as you know that it's gonna fit you, go for it. If you feel comfortable mixing and matching the sizes throughout the pattern, you do you. Boo. Yeah, and always go up a size if you're not sure if you're gonna fit because you can make things smaller. Ooh, let's see if I know this stuff. So there are a lot of, so we can take out our pattern instructions now. I mean, just so you can get a
Just
look
the
at them.
instructions.
Just the instructions, which are like these sheets right here.
Yep.
So I'm going to take out one that hasn't been. Let's do this. So when you take out the instructions, your first thing you're going to see is a drawing of all the nice dresses and stuff, or whatever you have, skirts, whatever. You can open it up. There's also going to be a nice little guide to all the pieces you have. So this is all the pieces that the pattern comes with. It'll tell you which pieces you need, or like each piece and what pattern you'll need it for. It will also then go on to tell you how you're going to want to lay out your fabric. Like, you don't have to follow this, but they know what they're doing and you probably should. So it will tell you for each piece and each width of fabric how you would want to lay out all of the pieces that you're going to need to cut it out the most efficient way. Then you're also going to notice that there's a lot of different, like if you start looking at the instructions, which you don't have to right now, but in the instructions they use a lot of words and some of them are English. So stay stitching is stitching that you use a small stitch length along the inside of the seam allowance. But, okay, I need to tell you guys the truth here. There are a lot of steps in patterns that you can just skip. Like, there are a lot of times where you're gonna read something and be like, why are you making me do this? And then if you think that and you're like, this isn't gonna help me at all, why am I doing this step? Just skip it. Like, a lot of these things like stay stitching can like just be, they can just be skipped. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. I mean, obviously you're going to want to do certain things, but yeah. Okay, edge stitching is stitching really close to the edge of a seam to stop it from fraying. Basting is using a long stitch length to temporarily hold the seam together. You can also do that by hand. Again, that's another thing where it's really up to you if you want to do it. Sometimes it's useful, but it's not always, like, because sometimes you're just going to go back over it, or it's not always the most useful thing. What is an overlock? Can be skipped, but it's nice for, oh, okay, so it's a stitch used to prevent fraying, can also be faked with a zigzag stitch. Oh, that would just, it's kind of like finishing your seams. If you want it to be nice and pretty at the end, you would use that seam, but also, like it says, that's what I do, you fake it with a zigzag stitch, it looks finished, no one can tell you it's not. And then ease stitching is used for gathering. You can't skip that step unless you don't want to gather for some reason. If your pattern says gather, you're gonna gather. So if you don't know what gathering is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when you take a big piece of fabric and you make it a lot smaller by basically pulling the fabric together. So, okay, this dress, after I finished it, I never wanted to gather again in my life because all of these ruffles are gathered. You can tell they're all like kind of puckered together. All of these ruffles, this entire skirt, gathering is so annoying, but it looks so good in the end. It's for ruffles though, so if you need to make a ruffle, if you need to make a ruffly skirt, anything like that, it's gonna get gathered. If you're gonna make poofy sleeves, that's gonna get gathered. But ease stitching, it's just like, it's an unknotted stitch. You start on one end, you stitch all the way to the other end, you don't knot either sides, and then you just pull it together so all the fabric gets onto like a little bit of the thread. So then you have really long threads that were in the fabric at one point, but now all of the fabric is on like half of the knot thread that you originally used. It's hard to explain, but once you do it, you understand what it is. All I know is that I never want to do it again. So I should not be teaching. I'm so mean to my pattern. Okay, so for your instructions, so all of these also come with instructions, which is nice because that's what we need to know what we're doing. So they all come with nice long instructions. They'll tell you what instructions are for which piece, and for like what part of which piece. So you're gonna want to read your instructions before you start like cutting out, or so it says, just so you know like what you need. But also like sometimes you'll read the instructions and realize you don't need this piece. So like if your instructions call for a pocket, but you don't want to put pockets in it, then you don't want to waste the fabric and cut it out. Just know what you're doing. You don't have to like go through them and like understand them 100%, but just so you know kind of the idea of what's going to happen. You're also going to determine what pieces you need, which again is on that nice long list in the front underneath all the little pattern like pieces that they show. Decide your cutting layout, which they already have for you most of the time. You don't have to follow it again, but it helps. I mean, it's there to help you. Another thing is to take note of the grain, the nap, or the stretch of the fabric. So every pattern piece, I don't have one that I can pull out right now, but every pattern piece has a little arrow on it, and that is going with the grain. That's the grain line. So basically the grain of the fabric it's like the pattern of the fabric. It's like every fabric is woven. So every fabric has sort of like a design, not gonna say like, it's not striped or something, but it does like, it was woven together in a certain way, so it looks a certain way. So when you're cutting your fabric, you're gonna want, it's not always necessary, but it's more than often necessary that you're gonna want everything to be going the same way. So every pattern piece has blessed you with an arrow that tells you this is, when you sew it together, this is going to be the way everything is facing. So you want all the arrows on your pattern pieces to be going the same way. Because like if you have a piece like this piece and this piece, both of the grain lines would be going down for the piece, or up, you know. So they all be going the same way, all the patterns will be going the same way when you're done cutting and when you sew it together. You just want to mind your grain lines or your pattern lines or your stretch. So if the fabric needs to stretch in a certain way, you want to make sure you cut it out. So like usually if you're going to get stretched fabric, you're going to want to have it stretched this way, so it can like stretch around your body and not vertically. I don't know why you'd want to stretch vertically, but I mean maybe you do. So you're going to want to make sure that when you're cutting it out, when you sew it together, it's going to be stretching the correct way. Like you are cutting the pieces out the correct way. I'm trying to explain things. If anything's like confusing, just be like, yo, what the heck? This might be going on YouTube. So what the heck, Holly? You're going to want to transfer relevant markings. So each pattern, well not each pattern, but a lot of pattern pieces are going to have notches, which are little triangles. You're supposed to cut them out. I don't cut them out. I will just mark them with like, you can mark them with a pencil, a pen. Okay, well, you can mark with a pencil, pen, crayons is what I liked to use before I lost all my crayons. I have white color pencils, you know, there is like Taylor's chalk and stuff, like the official stuff you can mark it with, so you could get that stuff too. But like, the notches are going to show you where things are going to line up. So when you put two pieces together, the notches should in theory line up, hopefully. So that's cut your notches. You can cut them out, up to you. You don't have to though. I'd say marking them will work just as fine. And then there are other things, I don't know what their exact words are, but their exact name are, but there are a lot of circles on all the patterns. Do you know the exact name of them? You know? Okay, no one does.
And starts too.
Yeah, well, so there are circles on a lot of the patterns. Those are usually for things like darts. Those are also for lining things up. But you're going to want to mark all those because you're going to have to usually do something with those, like sew them in a certain way or sew to them. And then, yeah, you're going to have to check for your seam allowance too, which each piece should tell you how much seam allowance you have, which means basically it's usually about 5/8, which means that if you cut with 5/8 of the seam, so like that you're going to have to cut off and trim like that you will be making the correct size garment. So, because if you were to have a whole inch of seam allowance, then it might not fit you the way that you had wanted to. But they also might be labeled with some, so it's different ones, so it's always good to check. I always just do like 3 or 4/8 just because that's always a safe bet. But you don't want anything to be too small, but that's something that could be fixed pretty easily. Okay. So yeah, some commercial patterns can be confusing. I did not bring the worst pattern that Simplicity ever came out with today, but I have it if anyone ever wants to look at it. I used it. It was awful. It was a kimono pattern. Sometimes they can be a little confusing. It's really a labor of figuring out when you can skip things and when you can't. And if you guys ever buy a pattern and you're not sure, just bring it to one of us and I'm sure we can help you figure out what you're supposed to do. If you get confused with a step or you don't know if you're allowed to skip a certain step, just ask us. I'm sure we can tell you when. Yeah, it's just, you guys have all worn clothes for your entire life, though I'm assuming. So you kind of have an idea as how they should look. So use your intuition. You know what a sleeve is. You might not know how to make a sleeve, but you know what it's supposed to look like when you're done with it. So, and yeah, these are the general steps that each pattern is going to follow. They're going to have you put the sides together, and the shoulders, and put the sleeves on, and then hem everything, which is when you make everything look pretty. You flip up an inch or so of the fabric and you sew it up so all the seams are, all the outside seams are nice and done. And then they'll have you put the buttons and all the extra fixings on. Take it away. I'm gonna go smaller.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about altering patterns because I can never find a pattern I like, so I always have to alter it. So basically, you have kind of a basic understanding of patterns now, hopefully. And something that you're probably going to have to do frequently is alterations. So there's minor alterations to pre-made patterns. They're pretty simple. So for instance, if you need to add a dart, you can do that. Adding and removing seams, adjusting necklines. The easiest way to do this, so I'll take, if I'm going to be adjusting a pattern of any kind, I will either trace the whole thing on a separate piece of paper, or at the very least lay it out so that I can add on. So for instance, when I cosplayed Kira, I took a simple corset pattern and it just had a circular, a sweetheart kind of style cut. And so I laid that down on a piece of paper and then I added the kind of weird little triangle thing, cut the triangle out and taped it to the pattern. So again, you want to just make those adjustments on paper. You don't want to really cut your pattern, especially if you might use it in the future for something else. So it's a good thing to do it on paper just so that you have that original pattern to either refer back to or to use again in the future. If you're making big alterations, then I would definitely recommend making a mock-up. And so, as you can see, make a mock-up or try making a mock-up. Did I mention, make a mock-up?
What's a mock-up, Jessica?
So mock-up is basically,
but
yeah,
what's mock-up?
a mock-up is basically, it's we will get to that later, but basically you're creating the same thing, just not in with your actual fabric, so it's like a duplicate original. I'll explain it a little better later, but basically usually it's made with muslin. I made one with fleece, don't do that. But basically if you're making like a big thing, that's definitely if you're just going from scratch and not using a pattern or doing a major alteration, then you'll want to make sure that it fits you before, again, you cut your very expensive, nice fabric. So one thing that a lot of people don't actually know is that in terms of lengthening or shortening, commercial patterns actually have a way for you to do that built in. So in a pattern, there's sometimes this line right here, that's the lengthen and shorten line. And so what you can do is, if you're trying to lengthen, you're going to want to cut along that line, so then you have two separate pieces. And then, like in these two pictures, you put tissue paper or cardstock or something. I usually prefer tissue paper so that it's the same kind of like feel and flexibility of the rest of the pattern. But you're going to tape it, and then you'll just follow the line down. So basically, you're just moving this end of the pattern down, and then that dart, you're just following, you're going to continue the line. So just make sure that you line things up when you're lengthening, otherwise things could get really off really fast. Like you don't want to have this end up tilted or something, so just make sure you're following those lines through. And then if you're going to shorten, I couldn't find really a good picture of that, but basically instead of cutting along that line, you're going to fold, if that makes sense. So I don't really have a scrap piece of paper, but I'm going to gently fold your pattern.
Oh no.
So say this right here is our line, you're just going to want to fold it up like that. So see how I just kind of took it, you can see from the side, it's kind of got like an accordion fold almost. But you're just going to want to fold it up. And again, you're going to want to make sure those lines are following through so that you're not completely messing things up. And you definitely want to do that with every pattern piece that you're like doing. So if you're making a bodice, don't just shorten or lengthen one piece of the bodice, because bodices there's usually like 5. So you are really going to have problems if you only shorten or lengthen one. But yeah, a lot of people don't know about that, so that's already built into patterns for you.
I didn't know that you could lengthen them.
Yeah, my mom taught me that, like just last year, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Another thing you can do is make patterns kind of bigger. So a simple alteration, this was something that Maddie did. She basically took a sleeve pattern, so this was the original pattern right here, and it was a bodysuit pattern. But she needed more of like a large sleeve, but the rest of the pattern worked really well for her. So in that case, what you can do is, again, you're going to want to start by tracing it out on other paper, and then you're kind of going to, this is where a mock-up would come in handy. She kind of sketched out further, so like with a sleeve, you want to make sure you're going, again, at diagonal, because then they fold together. But so again, you just want to sketch it out, make a mock-up. You don't want to accidentally like make the sleeve completely like too short, or it could be, I mean, she probably had to try it a couple times to make sure it wasn't like huge. Like you can kind of see she tried a little bit to do a line right there. I've definitely tried to adjust sleeves before, like lengthwise, and it didn't work very well. So make a mock-up just to make sure it fits before you cut it in your real fabric.
Because humans are three-dimensional beings, and sometimes you don't know, but you don't want to like try and figure out what a three-dimensional being is with your really expensive fabric. Do it with a sheet you got at Goodwill.
Frankensteining patterns. This is what I do a lot. So, like kind of like how Lee was saying with the whole mixing like using the sizes, you can just fully mix patterns. So you're They suggested that you play the numbers game, you measure the lengths of the seams, which can be a really good thing to do. A lot of times in my experience, I don't usually do that, and I just kind of will then make a mock-up to see, which I keep talking about, and I promise we'll get to
I don't know why
more
it's like the last
in detail.
slide.
Yeah, it's really the first slide. I should change that. But so like, you want to make sure things will fit together. You can always like, if a piece is just a little bit longer than another one, you can always cut that bit off. Again, using that shortening or lengthening technique. Or if you finish for some reason, and I've definitely done this before, and one piece is still kind of off, you can always hem it up a little bit. Don't like try to just wildly go out there and do something very different. Like you don't want to match, like, I guess, yeah, don't mix like 4 different bodice pieces together unless you can definitely try that, but again, make a practice one. So I, like for my Belle cosplay, it's actually like 3 different patterns put together to make that bodice, but I made a mock-up of it first. So I keep telling you, oh no,
I don't know why that.
because we're not in present mode.
Oh no.
Here, it's gonna be cut off now.
It's working.
Well, it's worth it.
I know.
So, what is this thing called a mock-up, I keep saying? So, a mock-up is like basically a copy of what you're going for made out of a cheap fabric. So, typically muslin. Holly uses sheets from Goodwill all the time. You want to make sure it's the same final fabric.
Not the exact same, but like similar.
Like similar. So, like, I mean, in terms of stretch and stuff like that, and like material-wise. So, like I said earlier, I made a mock-up with fleece once. Well, my actual fabric was leather. So when I went to transfer it did not go well. And the one ended up much bigger because the fleece stretched and it was just a mess. So go with fabric that's similar. Like, I guess in the case of that, muslin probably would have been better. You just don't want something with like, in terms of stretch, like widely different stretches. You can baste the pieces together. Like, I don't usually baste. When I'm going for a mock-up, I just kind of go for it. But you can then adjust the fit from there. So so say you altered your pattern. I'm gonna go back a little bit. So say you took like pieces from like one bodice and like then the skirt of another thing, and it's not seeming to fit together right, like it's not coming together in terms of length or something like that. That would be the time when you're making a mock-up, you want to adjust those things. So like that could be adding darts, which if you don't know what a dart is, actually have one. No? Do I have one? I don't think I have one.
I don't have any. Wait, this might. I don't know. This could.
I don't have any. Basically, a dart.
There was one.
Was there?
Way back. Way back when.
Way back when.
Wait, no.
Oh, here. No.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah. Okay. So right here in the corner is a dart. So eventually, these two seams, they're brought together, they're pinched together, so then your final seam is actually like right there. It's most common, it's found like in the bust for bodices. Oh, there is actually one up there. Yeah, so this is a dart right here. So it's designed to like kind of create that curve around your bodice. So like that's something you may need to add in your mock-up if like it's too baggy around your bust, or if it's not tight enough around your waist, you can add a dart to fix that. And then if you can either do one of two things. What I usually do is I just remember what I did and repeat that with my real fabric. Or if you're not as confident, you can take it apart, which if you plan to do that, then you would want to baste it so you could easily get the seam out and get it apart. Since it's such a looser seam. And then you're going to copy those pieces to pattern paper, so like tissue paper or just some regular paper is fine too. I've used, it's not cardstock, but like that thicker poster board paper, yeah. But if you're doing from scratch, like definitely want to make a mock-up before you go and waste all your nice fabric, like especially with stuff like leather,
Performance fabrics.
yeah.
Any
You
thing like that.
measure twice, cut once. Make a mock-up, then cut. So, yes, one does not simply modify a pattern without a mock-up. So,
The nice thing about mock-ups is that, like, if you want to add new pieces, you literally can just, like, keep adding pieces and, like, adding fabric until it's big enough or until it looks the way you want it. It doesn't have to look pretty. It's supposed to look ugly. It's there to just hopefully help the final product look pretty.
so one more tip for Frankensteining, and we kind of talked about it. You're probably not going to find exactly what you want, so get close. You can always add to a pattern. Like, if you are looking for something kind of like the top right, but with a lower cut, that's something that you can easily modify. Just again, you want to do it not on the original pattern, trace it. Now let's see.
Okay, we're not going to get super into this, mostly because, like, this is Patterns 101, and patterning from scratch is not 101. But sometimes there are just things that you're not gonna find patterns for. So these are two characters that I want to, or have wanted to cosplay in the past. Roby from Muggy Billy Park and Love from Diebuster, and both of them just have outfits that, like, I might be able to find bits and pieces of for, but otherwise, like, I'm gonna have to figure out I'm gonna have to figure it out on my own. And also, can we just acknowledge that she's not wearing pants, and that's why I haven't cosplayed her yet. So the way you're gonna want to do this is you're gonna want to break down the complicated designs into smaller pieces that you can, like, tackle one at a time rather than doing it all at once. Some of these pieces, like the top for Kurobi probably, which is the very, probably could find a pattern that's somewhat close to it, but like the bottom I'd have to do by myself. Well, I might be able to find her jacket or something similar to it, but everything else, some of them you might be able to find patterns for, but sometimes you're just not going to find what you want whatsoever, and you're just going to have to go for it. What is tape wrap? Okay, well,
Google it.
yeah.
Oh, that's what we did with Katie, I think. Making a.
Oh, okay, well, they talk about that soon. The things you can do, I mean, basically the best way to go about this is to do some math and make a bunch of mock-ups. Because when you're making your own patterns from scratch, math becomes your best friend. So hopefully you guys like to do some calculations. Also, one fun way to do this is body forms. So if you need to make something like a bodysuit or something that's very form-fitting, you can just wrap yourself in tape, get some friends, make a day of it. I've done 3 or 4 people at this point in my life. I've done 2 full body ones. I did a torso. Yeah, so basically the way to do this is you're going to wrap yourself in saran wrap. Or you're not going to wrap someone else is going to wrap you in saran wrap. So when you make a body form, you're going to want to get a few people you trust, a couple hours, and maybe buy them food because they deserve it when you're done, because you're going to become a crabby person halfway through the process. So you're going to wrap yourself in saran wrap. This is so when we start taping you, you don't get tape all over you. You also have the choice of wearing clothes that you don't care about. So then when you cut it up, you can just cut the clothes right off of you. If you go to Goodwill, buy some old clothes like for really cheap, then you don't have to worry about saving your clothes. I have cut a bra off someone once. So otherwise you don't have to do that, but that helps the person not fear for cutting your clothes off. But then you're going to wrap all the duct tape around the saran wrap and then cut it free, tape it up, and stuff it if you want to. It takes a lot of stuffing. You can use plastic bags. And then you have a body form. You don't have to make a full body. You could do just like your torso and then have like a really cheap dress form. people have like, you go buy like a lamp or something from Goodwill and take the top off and use that as the stand for it. It's a super cheap way if you don't want to drop like $100 on a body form, like, because that's how much you're going to spend if you go for it in a store. And also, as you can see Logan in the corner, he got a full body one I think it was for the Arbiter. And basically that's what you're gonna, if you want to make a bodysuit from scratch, that's going to be your best way to go about it, is you're going to make that and then you're just going to cut it up into the pieces you need, into the designs that you need. So yeah, if you guys ever need help, I know how to do this pretty well. You're going to need at least 2 rolls of duct tape and 2 things of saran wrap. Trust me. And it's, if you ever think of doing it, I will warn you, it's a somewhat difficult process. I've never had it done to myself. I've had my torso done, but that's it. But the full body, it gets very hot. You can't move. Your life is in the hands of other people. Sometimes the power in your house will go out and you're fighting against the sun going down. Just things like that. Anyways.
It can happen.
Okay, and then there are these, there's these things called pattern blocks. So a lot of shapes are going to appear over and over again. That's why I've kind of stopped buying patterns almost at this point, because a lot of these things are going to end up looking the same. You only need so many skirt patterns before you have all of the skirt patterns. Or you're only going to need so many dress patterns before you can just start Frankensteining them all together. And a lot of things will have like the same basic shape. So if you can make your own pattern, it's really just a matter of finding out what shape you need and then figuring out what measurements you need for each of those shapes. So I know I have a patterning book, we have 2 patterning books, and one of the patterning books I have actually it came with a standard A-line dress, pants, and a skirt, and a shirt. And then from there on, in the patterning books, it tells you how to alter all of those shapes into whatever you could want. So everything goes down to the same building blocks. When you're doing these by hand, it is going to require a lot of math, like I've already said, but it can be done, and then you'll have something that you know is going to fit you, that you know is going to look the way you want. Obviously, make a mock-up still, but it's also really rewarding to make your own patterns. It's kind of cool to know that you can just sit down and make a cloth, make a clothes, make a clothing. Yeah, you're going to definitely want to know your measurements, and then yeah, you're going to want to know that 2D forms, you're not a 2D person, you are a 3D thing. I tell the story of my friend when I was in high school wanted to make a bodysuit 2 days before the con, and we were super stressed, and I said it's not going to work, and spoiler, it didn't. But we were getting towards the sleeves, and I just had her put her arm down, and I drew a rectangle, and I cut them out, and then we realized arms aren't rectangles, they are circles.
Cylinders.
They are cylinders, not rectangles. You are a 3D person. We were young, I was 17. I didn't know any better, but you are a 3D person, and so you might take some getting used to figure out exactly where you're going to have to lengthen the piece, but you'll get used to it. And then there are going to be some tools you'll need to make your own patterns. You're definitely going to want a ruler. You can have a French curve. I don't have one, but
one thing I kind of want to mention that when you're patterning from scratch, sometimes it's a good idea to have clothes of your own that fit you really well and use them as a basis or a template for making the pattern. I don't use patterns, so that's what I do. I always use my own clothes as a template, and I usually modify them as I go along.
You also, if you don't want to cut up your own, you don't have to cut up your own clothes. I know you just trace them out.
Yeah, I just trace them out. However, like Jess said before, mock-ups. I've learned to do mock-ups when tracing, because sometimes tracing just doesn't work out as well as I hoped. I've learned to make mock-ups, and it really helps when trying to create the final product that fits you right nicely.
And the other things you're going to need, you'll need a calculator or your phone, Google. Patterning paper, so just tracing paper. You can find it, I roll at any craft store, or if it's a smaller thing, you might just be able to use like printer paper. You can print, if you are really lazy like me, you can just tape a bunch of pieces of printer paper together. Don't do that. Muslin or some other thing to make the mock-up out of. I use, as Jessica mentioned, I use sheets from Goodwill. You can go buy them, like get a sheet set for like $3 or $4. And then sometimes that sheet might actually come in handy. Like I bought a really pretty blue and white polka dot sheet, and then I used some of it for a lining for my cape because it's really cool. So sometimes you might actually find some cool sheets that you can repurpose. And then a seam ripper, because you're gonna make mistakes. And if you don't know what a seam ripper is, it's exactly what it says on the can. It is a thing that rips out the seams when you make a mistake or when you need to take something apart. It is your best friend. I don't think I've done a single cosplay without having to use one. Is when you make a mistake and you have to go back, you're gonna have to use a seam ripper to take it out. Or, just cut it in your anger, cut the seam out. But also, other things that I always have in my sewing box that are pretty useful for making patterns, I have a protractor and a compass, like those things you used to use in like geometry when you were like 15. Like I still have those from like middle school, and they're really good when you need to get a certain angle, or if you need to draw a circle, because circles are hard to draw, and unless you have like a can or a bowl that is the exact right shape that you need, you're gonna want a protractor. They're just very useful tools to have when making your own patterns. Yeah, darts.
We just talked about these.
So darts let you shape fabric as it says. They're right up there. You can see kind of what they are. They'll let you give something depth. So especially in like bodices and skirts, in bodices it'll give it more of a shape, especially if you're trying to fill it out a bit. It will give you the space to fill it out and the shape to fill it out. Corsets, someone out there has a corset pattern and it has a lot of pieces. I've made a few corsets. They come with like 8 or 9 pieces at least, and that's why they fit you so well, because they're like, that's what they're made for, and they have so many seams. The more seams you have, the better it's going to fit, but also it might look weird if you don't want that many seams. But some things are just going to have to require more seams or more darts to make them fit the way you want them. That's why, like, if you see a pleated skirt, it's very uniform and it sticks the way it is. But if you have like a circle skirt which has no pleats, it's going to be very flowy. It's not going to really hold the shape unless you put a petticoat under it. But yeah. And then darts are for like to add curves to the shape of the clothes. Whew. And yeah. Conclusion. As with many things in cosplay patterning. So patterns, they look really confusing and sometimes the instructions will make no sense, but all it takes is, there's a lot of sources online that you can look up if you don't understand. You can ask us. You'll eventually get the hang of what everything on the pattern means. It might take a few tries, but eventually you'll get the hang of it. It's trial and error. They're so useful though, so like don't get frustrated with one once and say like, I swear up patterns, I'm doing everything by hand from now on, because you're gonna need them. You're gonna need them. Be patient, prepare to make mistakes. You might have to make more than one mock-up, you might have to make 6 mock-ups. You might just jump in like I do half the time and make no mock-ups. Don't do it. And you're gonna have to spend time on it, because in the end, once you have the pieces of fabric cut out, it's just so, and you're done. The patterning is where you actually make the clothes. It's where you figure out how you're gonna make them, and it's if you don't do it right in the patterning stage, then it's not gonna turn out. Like, just telling you that. Like, if you don't pattern it out correctly, it's not gonna be a clothes set fit. And yeah, we're always here to help. Google is definitely your friend. I have a few patterning books. Everything can be made, guys. Anime physics, they don't exist, but like, we can make it happen. We just have to find the right pattern for it. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?